on. My mic is open. Hi, folks. You're listening to KOWS 107.3 FM in Occidental, California. And on the telephone from Swope, Virginia, we have Joel Salatin. Good afternoon.
Hi, great to be with you.
That's me too. It's great to be with you, and I know that our listeners are happy to have you come talk to us again, and I think we have a lot of wonderful things to talk about. Let me take a stab at an introduction, and we'll dive in.
All right.
Joel F. Salatin is considered by many people the most influential farmer in America. He farms 550 acres in Swope, Virginia, and let's see. He is the author. He has something on the order of 900 cattle and 700 pigs, and is the author of something like 8 books, including recently Everything I Want to Do is Illegal, War Stories from the Local Food Front, The Sheer Ecstasy of Being a Lunatic Farmer, and the latest book, Folks, This Ain't Normal, A Farmer's Advice for Happier Hens, Healthier People, and a Better World. Mr. Salatin, I have a little bit of a curveball to throw to you.
Okay.
The recent book, This Ain't Normal, has never arrived here, so I haven't had the pleasure of reading it yet. But
okay, did you ask for a copy?
Oh yes, but that's beside the point, because I have no doubt that it's not going to impede us in any way. Believe me. Let's see. I recently saw the film Farmageddon, and I've been reading material from the websites, and I'm particularly, for the sake of our talk today, I hope you'll be agreeable to this. I'm particularly enthralled by the wonderful interview you did with, is his name Bill Hyde?
Okay.
You familiar with it?
I do so many, I'm blank just for the second. But anyway.
Yeah, this was a radio interview, off the grid radio.
Ah, okay. Yes.
It was back at the end of July, about 4 months ago.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
It's unfair to. I know that you're around the clock busy. So anyway, all I'm really doing here is saying hello to you for the time being.
Great. Okay.
And also, would you kindly, to your satisfaction, complete the introduction?
Complete the introduction. Well, I'm a farmer. We grow pastured beef. Salad bar beef, pigurator pork, pastured poultry, eggs, and meat, and turkeys and rabbits and timber products without chemicals. And we've been here for 50 years. And we use pastures. Everything's on pasture, rotated, so the animals move, the infrastructure moves, and the fertility comes from our own on-site carbon sequestration recycling. And finally, we do direct market to about 4,000 families and 50 restaurants and about 10 retail outlets. So everything is direct marketed.
Yeah. Well, for the listeners who are not familiar with you yet, Joel Salatin has electrified our understanding of farming, food production, food distribution, and is a brilliant innovator on the farm. And his work is to be discovered. He's featured he has certain videos that can fill you in, talking to the listeners now. And I'll tell you the truth, Mr. Salatin, most of our listeners know you quite well. And we have enormous gratitude for all you have done and all that you show us. And it's very exciting to envision a future where farmers all over the world learn from you, and we get on with the business of saving our behinds on this planet and learning how to live here in peace and happiness and health, and you're a force in our world, and we're very, very grateful for you and grateful to have you come talk to us.
Well, thank you. It's my honor to be with you.
Good. About 8 days ago, there was an article in the Sunday New York Times called "Young Farmers Find Huge Obstacles to Getting Started." And I know, I don't know if you've seen the article, but it's nothing new to you. But it's all about how young folks who have a great desire to get into farming are really having a hard time because of the economics and the availability, the expense of finding land to farm. So can we begin? Would you kindly address this issue?
Sure. It's been a long time coming. The fact is that probably for the last 30 years or 40 years, for the first time in certainly our culture's history, farmland has moved into a totally unrelated ratio to its productive capacity. In other words, even up into the mid-1960s, better land was more valuable than poor land, and land was not viewed so much as speculative. But since the mid-60s and certainly the early 70s, the development potential of land and the land value on the marketplace has gone through the roof. That's why, now many areas starting in the late 60s have land use taxation or some sort of a farm formula adjustment to tax land at its farming capacity rather than its developable capacity, developable being, residential, strip malls, industrial, that sort of thing. And so what this means is that for the entry-level farmer, where in the 1940s or 50s you could actually, buy a piece of land and pay for it with the production and even get a salary on it while you were doing that, today that is not the case. So how do we, how do we solve this? I mean, some people think that the real estate bubble, including farmland bubble, and it certainly has come down. It's come down in our area, 30 to 50% in the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. It's going to continue to drop. Some people think it's going to, drop way, way low. And of course, if the land values drop, and food due to high energy costs or other things, other disruptions, if food goes expensive, then obviously that ratio will begin to rectify a little bit. But barring that, what we have right now is a great potential for young people to lease land or rent land. The lease and the rental is still extremely low. We had an apprentice that finished with us, went back up home to upstate New York, Ithaca area, and within 30 days of being home, of returning home, was offered 3 parcels totaling 1,000 acres of prime upstate New York farmland for free if he would just utilize it. In fact, Cornell did a study 2 years ago on abandoned farmland in New York, land that has been actively farmed 15 years ago and in the last 15 years has been abandoned. And in New York State alone, it was 3.4 million acres. So there is a tremendous amount of land available, and the main thing is we need to get away from this idea that in order to farm, we have to own the land. There are lots of collaborative arrangements that can be developed. I mean, like the lady that she lived in a condominium in the middle of a city, She went to her landlord and she said, that lawn out there around the condominium, could I have a 10-foot by 10-foot spot and grow a garden? He said, sure. She went out. She made such a beautiful garden that the landlord came and said, "You want some more?" She said, "Yeah." So pretty soon she had the whole condominium lawn in a farm, and then other owners came and said, "Can you do that to our place?" Before you know it, she was full-time farming in the middle of the city, just beautifying landscapes with edible production. Yeah. So bloom where you're planted.
Right. This is happening everywhere, yeah?
Oh, it sure is happening everywhere. There are numerous books now out on urban agriculture, farming the edges. There's spin farming, which has come out of Canada. It's an acronym. I can't think of sustainable. I don't know, intensive, something like that. But anyway, called spin farming, SPIN, and where a person can make a full-time living, a full-time living on less than an acre, and most cases on a half an acre. Well, if you can make a living on a half an acre, there are a lot of. I mean, that's almost a field edge or a road right of way. That's a median strip in the highway almost. You can put together a half an acre. So. There are principles involved, stacking and complementary planting and all sorts of things. But we know a lot now about how to really intensify production per acre, and the way to intensify it is not with genetic manipulation and chemical fertilizers and 20-foot-long combines. The way to intensify, I mean, that all looks good, and we stand in awe of big machinery and big fields. But ultimately, the way in is with small-scale, highly managed, highly complex relational intensification.
So this is an unprecedented historical revolution in agriculture.
Yes, I would say so. I mean, the fact that we have now, for example, drip irrigation. What a huge breakthrough that was and is, in order to get water to point, with very, very little. You don't have to tote buckets. I mean, imagine we've only had affordable pipe for only about 60 years. Up until about 60 years ago, there was no polyethylene black plastic pipe or anything like that. So we can now deliver water. We've got ease of making containers. If the petroleum that goes into trucking food around the world, if that petroleum would go into, for example, plastic rain barrels and reservoirs instead, that gravity fed into intensive urban gardens and production, edible production scapes, the sheer volume would be unbelievable. Instead, what we're doing is that we're taking this petroleum blip, if you will, in history, this cheap energy blip, and instead we're running it through tractor trailers to haul 95% water mesclun mix and tomatoes from California to New Hampshire in January. That's not only is it not sustainable, it's totally nuts.
Yeah. Joel, the article says that the Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack,
yes,
that the 2008 Farm Bill includes a program for beginning farmers and ranchers, and that the Agriculture Department has allotted $18 million to universities and extension programs to educate beginning farmers. Is this, are they doing it right?
You really want me to answer that?
I sure do.
Listen. There are some good people in universities, extension, whatever. There are some few people, a few good people, but you have to look real hard to find them. Most folks in the government, the government educational institution, most of those folks are completely tied in to the mindset of Monsanto and Company, globalism, corporatism, and very much an anti, self-fulfilling movement. In other words, self-reliance.
Right.
At the end, at the final analysis, they still want people to be dependent on outside sources of fertility, outside sources of information, outside sources of energy, because that's what makes gross domestic product, right? Create a lot of problems and inefficiencies, and that makes gross domestic product go up. Mm-hmm. If you and I put the money in our pocket and we depatronize the energy cartel and the wheat cartel and the fertilizer cartel, if we depatronize and the big food industries from Archer Daniels Midland to the Tyson, if we defund them with our own self-reliance, i.e. getting in our kitchens and buying bulk foods from a local farmer and canning them and preserving them and freezing them ourselves, processing them ourselves, preparing them ourselves. If we as farmers and food growers, if we take our patches of lawn and instead of buying landscape services, if we take over the lawn, spade it up, and turn it into an edible landscape, and eliminate buying things at the grocery store, it doesn't take very much of that to completely turn the power, prestige, and profits of the current status quo big players on its head, and what I call invert the entire food farming landscape economy to where it is then decentralized and individualized and self-reliant, as opposed to being paranoid, fearful, and dependent on some big, global entity that we can't understand or see or penetrate.
Mm-hmm. Joel, this sounds suspiciously like some sort of prescription for happiness. Well, the country of Bhutan, up there near Nepal, back in I think it was 1950, their king issued a decree that no longer would the country of Bhutan measure success in terms of gross domestic product, but instead they would measure it in terms of gross domestic happiness. And they've actually spent now half a century formulating mathematical and scientific formulae to articulate the benchmarks of gross domestic happiness. Mm-hmm. And, in our country, in our nation, it's amazing how we talk about growth as if growth in and of itself is happiness. But, cancer is a growth. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing inherently good or sacred or happy about growth inherent. What is happy is good growth. Bad growth is not. And so, what this country has tried to do is articulate, well, what is good growth? So let me give you a couple of examples. They say that if interest in elections drops, i.e., if a percentage of people casting ballots in an election, if it begins to drop, then that's an indicator of social failure, political failure. Imagine if that were the case in our country. I mean, imagine if the healthcare industry began to collapse because people were eating such good food and exercising that they were healthy. No. Instead, our country subsidizes high fructose corn syrup, soil erosion, chemical fertilizer, and all the things that devitalizes food, destroys the landscape, and encourages people to eat unpronounceable food and unhealthy food. We encourage that. I mean, we've got a whole bureaucracy of food police that tells our country that it's perfectly safe to feed your kids Mountain Dew, Twinkies, and Cocoa Puffs, but it's unsafe to drink raw milk, eat compost-grown tomatoes,
and Aunt Matilda's homemade pickles might kill you. When you have a situation like that, obviously, healthcare is going to go through the roof. Ultimately, you can't have a healthier population than the health of the soil, the food, and the economy that sustains it. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, misery's good for business.
Yeah, that's right. It's like Wendell Berry says. He says, "What's bad for us creates more gross domestic product than what's good for us."
Joel, tell us about your grandfather, please.
My grandfather. My grandfather lived in Indiana, and he was a tinkerer, craftsman, green thumb, and he developed the very first walking sprinkler. The ones that roll up the garden hose, and he had this large garden. He had an octagonal chicken house where he grew mangels and sugar beets in one section of his garden, and he would harvest those, put them in a root cellar for the winter, and skewer them on finishing nails at peck height in this chicken house, so the chickens could have fresh vegetable material in the winter. And had this large garden surrounded by a T-topped grapevine trellis that some of my earliest very poignant childhood memories were going up there late in the summer, because we were farming here. We couldn't go early in the spring because we had earlier in the summer because we had hay to make and different things. So we always went late in the season when the grapes were ready to harvest. And just as a little child, walking under those T-top trellises and just reaching up and being able to gorge myself on these succulent grapes around this manicured garden with fresh produce. I mean, it just created this sense of abundance, and I think that idea of an abundant womb or an abundant nest has stuck with me. The older I get, it's almost like it becomes more and more powerful in my psyche of just how important that early visceral relationship with abundance really was, and it was a very powerful point in shaping my future.
Mm-hmm. Would you give us a quick history of Polyface?
Oh, Polyface, Mom and Dad.
If you're tired of this, we can skip that one.
No, not at all. No, I didn't mean to.
Oh,
I'm just where do you start? That's the thing. Mom and Dad came here in 1961. I was just 4. We had lost a farm to expropriation in Venezuela, South America. Dad had been there 14 years. Mom had been there 10 years. And we fled the back doors. The guerrillas came in the front door and lost everything, came back to the U.S., and looked at farms within a day's drive of Washington, D.C., and settled here in 1961 on the most eroded, cheapest, junkiest piece of land that you could imagine. That's why it was cheap, and started over. And Mom and Dad both worked out and paid for the farm. And Dad was a genius. He was an accountant by profession, did public accounting, and he realized the whole vicious circle of chemical fertilization and silos and tillage and annuals as being a vicious cycle that as a small farmer you could never produce enough to make a living because the margins, the gross margins were too narrow, and you had to. The whole idea of industrial farming was to get bigger and 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 bigger. Because your margins were so small, you had to continually get bigger to get up there, and he knew that wasn't what we wanted to do, and it was almost undoable here in our old Virginia area. And so, what are the alternatives? So he went, instead of tillage, went to perennials. So instead of corn, he went to perennial grass. Instead of confining animals, he went to pasture-based animals. Instead of stationary shelter, barns and sheds and things, went to portable shelters. Instead of buying fertility from off the farm, went to chipping branches and composting and generating our own carbon on the farm, so we didn't have a fertilizer bill, and using high-tech electric fencing and biomimicry, mimicking the way the herbivores, work around the world with mob stalking, herbivorous, solar conversion, lignified carbon sequestration, fertilization. Gradually began this healing process. We fenced out steep hillsides, planted some trees, began this slow reclamation, so that but he never made a living from the farm. So in my late teen years, I really wanted to farm. I was the one child that really wanted to do it, and so he said he would hang on to it if I wanted to continue with it, and so I did. And so September 24, 1982, I left. I was working at a local newspaper as a journalist, and left that, after just 18 months after graduation from college, and came back to the farm full time. And Teresa and I got married, and we started basically with raw land and a dream, and started selling the grass-finished beef. And then we added chickens, and both meat and then eggs. And then we added pigs to do our composting, to what we call pigorators. And then our son added rabbits, and then we added turkeys. And so today, we're a 2 million plus income farm, supporting 20 full-time salaries, and supplying 5,000 families and 50 restaurants and 10 retail facades from a grass-based operation.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by beyond organic?
Beyond organic. Well, as you may know, several years ago, about a decade ago or more, the U.S. federal government took over organic certification in the United States, and in fact licensed the word organic. In other words, I cannot say, legally, I can't say I'm an organic farmer. Now, our farm was organic way before the term was even developed, and we used the term as Rodale, Organic Gardening and Farming Magazine. Rodale basically invented the term in 1950, and still carried in the magazine by that name. Anyway, as once the government owned the term, then we couldn't use it unless we were licensed, and I was kind of offended at that. I mean, here we'd been pioneering these principles, and we're, a leading spokesman for the whole movement, and here it became illegal for us to even use the term that we'd been using for 30 years. So I started looking around for, well, then what are we, And so I came up with Beyond Organic, because once the government began licensing the term, they essentially gutted it and adulterated it. And in fact, USA Today newspaper actually has an article about the farmers that are jumping ship from organic certification, because it's become just a pile of paperwork and meaningless.
It's obnoxious. I mean, to make a play to own our common language is just, it doesn't get any more obnoxious than that.
Well, it sure doesn't. And in fact, maybe a lot of people don't realize that was one of the first things that the slave owners did when slaves came from Africa, was to forbid them to speak in their native tongue, because that's how they organized, organized themselves. If they talked in the field, the owner didn't know what they were talking about. That's how they could, conspire and do all sorts of mis, mal, and non-feasance, against the plantation owner. So one of the first things that these new slaves had was they had their language taken away, and I feel a little bit like that. That here, those of us who developed the language have now had it taken away by the government.
I love reading about how the pigs work with the forests and how the chickens work with the cows. Let's see. You call it a virtuous cycle. And you use the term a creative disturbance. Tell us about that, please.
Sure. Oh, that's one of my favorite questions, because that's one that the radical environmentalists really don't get. And my mantra, I'm a Christian libertarian environmentalist capitalist lunatic. So
among other things,
I appreciate ecology and environment. So what's this disturbance? Okay, creative disturbance. Well, what this is, all living things. Well, let me back up. Disturbance is the precursor to innovation. You read even business books, and they'll talk about, sacred cows make the best burgers, and that's one of the titles of one of them. And there are others, but there's always right before a punch through in innovation and creativity, there's always a point of dissonance. I mean, look at Arab Spring over there. Look at what's going on. The American Revolution was a time of disturbance, but it was the breaking forth. It was a creative disturbance. It was creative, launching a new country. I mean, having a baby is disturbing, but that's the beginning of a new life. And so this principle of disturbance being the launch of new succession and innovative thinking and opportunity is it's an axiom. The Egyptians have the metaphor of the phoenix rising from the ashes, and of course, we love to talk about that beautiful phoenix rising. They don't like to talk about the ashes. And so disturbance is always the precursor to successional freshening up and innovation. And so what we're doing with the livestock here is the kind of periodic disturbance that's necessary to exercise the ecology to a higher state of biomass accumulation than it would in a static state. So many times the radical environmentalists think the best thing we can do for the ecology is to just annihilate all of humanity. We'll all go away, and everything will be fine. And that's not really the case. Because the ecology has actually been helped by human creativity for a long time. Now, it's been hurt. There's no question. I repent in sackcloth and ashes for all that my ancestors have done that's been ecologically devastating. But that doesn't negate the fact that when you bring human creativity and manage disturbance, I call it ecological massage, to the ecology, we can actually make things a lot better than they were in a static state. So how do we do this? Well, in a static state, for example, it uses fire and predation and herbivores and perennials moving across the landscape in mobs of mobbed up numerical density, pushed by predation, either two-legged or four-legged, to create the kind of high-impact disturbance that's necessary to create more diverse germination of plants, chop up the biomass so that the soil microbes can decompose it. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing if you think about it as ecological exercise or ecological deep massage. Here's the deal. So how do we duplicate these kinds of principles on a domestic landscape? And how we do that is using high-tech electric fencing and our own management to make sure that the different animals are in the right place at the right time to do their disturbance factor. and we even use pigs in the forest. Pigs historically were eaters of acorns, perennials. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, the Iberian Peninsula in Spain. I mean, it's all cork trees with acorns. It's all about perennial consumption because until cheap energy created cheap grain, you couldn't afford to feed animals. You couldn't afford to feed omnivores grain, let alone herbivores. And so the pigs then turn the leaf litter into the ground and stimulate decomposition that builds soil. They eat the bugs that would invade the root crowns and help keep the trees healthy, and stimulate an additional floor covering of different kind of plants under the tree canopy that wouldn't exist otherwise. So it's all very much a win-win thing, and so it's that periodic disturbance and rest. So if I could take that where angels fear to tread, here's the deal for me. The reason that both the Bush and Obama bailout plans are terrible is because, for a lot of reasons, but one is that there is that they do not allow the ashes that are necessary for an innovative phoenix to rise. They do not allow the level of disturbance necessary to create the dissonance that precedes true creative innovation. All that the bailouts do is artificially prop up the failed schemes of the status quo and forestall innovative creativity coming to the marketplace of ideas and infrastructure.
They wouldn't let these institutions die.
No, that's right. And if the institutions collapsed, there would always be fresh new institutions that that came up as an alternative.
Absolutely. Gee whiz. It's fantastic. Let me see here. Hang on with me 1 second.
Okay.
Fertility and regeneration, right? That's what it's about.
Yes.
Joel, I mentioned when we got on the phone about a half an hour ago that I read this piece of this radio interview you did, which spoke about your Christianity. And it really turned me on because not only are you passionately involved in the regeneration of our land and our country and our culture and our hearts and souls, but what I read in your passionate in the purity, what I hear is the purity of your Christianity is the regeneration of Christianity itself. That your Christianity has everything to do with the actual life and teachings of Christ and the elaboration of those teachings. Would you be agreeable to talking to us about your Christianity?
Absolutely. Yes, no problem. I think that if we could just categorize the religious right, if you will, in this country, has really squandered what should have been its moral high ground in being the defender and promoter of creation stewardship, of caretaking this garden that God left to us. The thing for me is, well, there's two things. One is that I see the physical world, and certainly God's creation, I see it as an object lesson, and we therefore are the stewards of this object lesson of divine attributes in our world. And so my idea is that our farm, our food system, indeed our lives, this is not just about farming, this is about life, our lives should exude forgiveness. That means we need to live our relationships should be forgiving. Our food should build forgiveness into us. That means that it should increase our immunity rather than reducing our immunity. Our farming practices should build soil to build forgiveness into the soil so it can handle drought and flood and things like that, rather than making the soil less resilient and less forgiving to the hardships that nature throws our way. The point is that we are ultimately in the redemption business. We're supposed to take that spiritual dimension of redemption and extend it into our visceral life. And I think that we have done a disservice to ourselves, and I'm being very broad here, us in the the religious, the evangelical community, if you will. We've done a great disservice in allowing ourselves to have to let old dualism come into our theology to where we say, spiritual is good and physical is bad. God didn't say that. He said it was all good. And so how do we create goodness in this fallen physical world? We create goodness the same we do it in the fallen spiritual, and that is by looking at the attributes of redemption and the principles of redemption and saying, how do we, in fact, build that kind of forgiveness and redemption into the physical world? And we don't do it. I mean, think about it. If you take animals, I'll just take a very simple example. You take animals and confine them in one single building without fresh air, without sunshine, feeding an artificial diet, deny them exercise, and put them in a social climate where they want to cannibalize each other and where pathogens don't have to work to stay alive, and it stimulates pathogenicity. What you have there is a spiraling downward production model. But if you take those animals and you put them in a habitat that is conducive to their expression of physiological phenotypical distinctiveness, i.e. the tomato-ness of the pigness of the pig, the chickenness of the chicken, if you put them in a habitat that allows them to express their gifts and their talents and their God-given creative uniqueness, then with fresh air, sunshine, exercise, a diet that includes a salad bar, movement that puts them onto a hygienic, sanitary place all the time, then you remove all of those pathogenic vectors that are created by the other system. And that's what I'm talking about, that we can either... So the question is then, here, is what are you and I here for? What are we here for? Well, we are here. One of the things that we're here to do is to actually take this creation that God left us and use our creativity and human ingenuity to massage it and to exercise it into a more forgiving, healing environment than it is in its fallen state, which means that, I'll give you another example, which means we want to increase water retentiveness on our land. Tillage, growing annuals, corn, beans, wheat, whatever, reduces water retentive capacity on the soil and in fact stimulates erosion and runoff. And so by going to a perennially based system, we increase the soil organic matter, the porosity of the soil, so that the water can penetrate and hold for a longer period of time. This is all a part of actually creating a more forgiving, healing type of landscape. And it goes, all the way to our food. How do we eat in a way? How do we eat in a way that actually gives us healthier bodies? Trust me, it's not by eating food that we can't pronounce, food that we can't make in our kitchen, and food with that won't rot, that has such a long shelf life. We can put it on a shelf and it'll sit there, for 20 years. It has to be living food, not dead food. It has to be life, not biology, not mechanics. And that really separates our world right now, in my opinion, between what I call godly-based farming and ungodly, is that the industrial farming is what I call mechanical, where it views life as fundamentally mechanical, where a pig is just an inanimate pile of protoplasmic structure to be manipulated however cleverly hubris can imagine to manipulate it, as opposed to a living thing that has its own reason for being and demands reverence and understanding from us. And it is in understanding the pigness of the pig and promoting the essence of pig that then elevates the life so that there is a meaningful sacrifice when it gives its life for us.
That's right.
Whether it's a carrot, tomato, pig, whatever, life only life must die. Our teeth masticated, our enzymes, and then our bacteria in our intestines, digest it. And life, whether it's vegetable or animal or whatever, life is given up and then becomes regenerative flesh of our flesh and bone of our bones. And how we turn that giving of life into something that's sacred and meaningful is in respecting and honoring it in life that elevates the death to a place of sacramental sacrifice in helping us to understand how fragile and how mysterious and awesome life is in appreciating the value of the animal and the plant that lived and then died, that we may indeed live. If we abuse it, if we don't care about it, if we view it as just a machine and a mechanical, then we don't elevate it to the point of a sacrifice to give us life. And what it does is it cheapens life. Overall, it then cheapens life, and there's no sacred element to anything.
Right. And it will destroy us.
And it will destroy us, absolutely.
We're here to care for each other and to serve each other.
Right.
Well, this is magnificent, and you use the word ecstasy now and then, don't you?
Yeah, I put it in the title of my next to the last book, The Sheer Ecstasy of Being a Lunatic Farmer, because when things are healing and you see that progress and you realize that every year the soil is building and you're sequestering, you're turning more solar energy into biomass, and it's becoming more and more beautiful because the water is cleaner, the air is fresher, the dew is more sparkly. The word that comes to mind is ecstasy. It really is, and so I'm a promoter of superlatives. I like to talk in superlatives. I think we've become such a timid, dumbed down, humdrum society that if somebody starts talking in superlatives, we look at them as if they're high on something.
Yeah. We've forgotten how superlative life is.
Yes, that's for sure. Well said.
We only have a few minutes. I wanted to. I'm interested. I'm very concerned that we have a lot of raw milk here in California, and
right.
it's under just a terrible attack.
Yes.
Here in California. Is there anything you'd like to say about the raw milk situation?
Well,
or I would love it if you would run by, for our listeners, how the chickens and the cows get together, and people who visit your farm are astonished at how clean it is, and how unsmelly it is, and how filled with insects or with obnoxious insects.
Yeah, obnoxious insects. Yeah. Well, You mean on the raw milk? Yeah, there is a conspiracy against raw milk for sure. Conspiracy, that makes you sound like a nut. I will call it a fraternity of ideas. and that fraternity has demonized milk. You got to understand that the demonization of raw milk developed back when during urbanization, prior to refrigeration, when cows were confined next to urban breweries to eat the distiller's grain. That's what created the problems that were finally eliminated by, a new understanding of hygiene, stainless steel, rural electrification, transportation, and all those sorts of things. Those are kind of a blip in our nation's history. You have to understand too that risk is, you have to be careful about risk. I mean, a lot more people die every year in drowning in backyard swimming pools than have ever died in the last half century from drinking raw milk. So, if you really want to reduce risk, you would eliminate backyard swimming pools, not raw milk. So, these things get squirrely when you have the whole paranoia of humans, of the culture on it.
Yeah.
Now, the way the chickens and cows work is that the chickens follow the cows in egg mobiles. The chickens scratch through the cow patties and help to fertilize the pasture, and of course they eat out the fly larvae, the bugs from the patties, and sanitize those. So you have not only increased fertilization, but you have sanitation, biological pasture sanitation, with the animals doing the work. So now suddenly the chickens aren't just egg layers; they become team players and collaborators, co-laborers in this great land healing ministry. It really changes the emotional aspect of it.
Are your ideas catching on?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. There are farms all over the world that are running with these ideas, and it's just wonderful. Of course, that makes Monsanto livid, and so they're trying to, of course, marginalize, demonize, or criminalize this alternative. But we'll just keep on.
Yeah, we will. It's just a cover for domination.
Right. That's right.
Joel, where do you buy your overalls?
Where do I buy my overalls? Well, I'm kind of a Wrangler guy, and we get them straight from Wrangler because only the head Wrangler store sells them. Without just the even numbered leg length. And I am a 31. I'm not a 32, and I'm not a 30. I'm a 31. So we get them straight from there. We get all our shirts we get them from the thrift store and from people that have been fired or died at their job or whatever.
Yeah, that was my funny wise guy question. Joe, would you last licks? We have a great listenership. Is there anything you want to say that hasn't? Is there anything you want to say? And we'll just thank you so very much for coming and talking to us.
Oh, well, I appreciate it very much. It's an honor to be with you. I would encourage all your listeners to go out and get my new book, Folks, This Ain't Normal. It's a look at our current abnormal, highly developed civilization that we think for the first time in human civilization is so smart and sassy that we can extricate our moorings to our ecological umbilical. So go out and get that. I think it's a delightful read. It's gotten wonderful reviews in a lot of different places. I'll tell you this, I think it's the first book in history that got both a rave review in Mother Jones magazine and is going to be featured on the front cover of American Conservative magazine in December.
Beautiful.
Have you ever seen a book that got very positive response in both Mother Jones and American Conservative? That's got to be a record, don't you think?
Well, not only is it a record, yeah, I do think, and it's very auspicious because this is just the kind of bridge that we need to build so badly.
Yes.
Between these polarized camps that are that have tended to be mutually exclusive for so long, when in reality there's so much common ground it's embarrassing.
Yes, you're exactly right. Well said.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Catch you later.
Yes, sir. Pleasure.
Take care.
Bye.
Joel F. Salatin, Salatin. He is, well, you know how he is. This is just wonderful. For those of you who haven't seen any videos of Polyface Farms, please track one down and watch it. It's, the word ecstasy is right on because it's thrilling. It demonstrates, how we can make it, how we're going to make it, this is the only way we're going to make it, is by being smart and innovative and full of love and community and care. And this is what's happening now. This is the great turning. This is the great transformation that we're unmistakably seeing signs of everywhere. It looks like a real dawn. It looks like that the sun is rising on the horizon. Sure hope so. Joel F. Salatin, Swope, Virginia, Polyface Farms. Thank you very much for talking.